is telling the U.S. to stop meddling in its domestic affairs. This comes after a top State Department official referred to Beijing as a, quote, thuggish regime. Here's exactly what that State Department spokeswoman said.
I don't think that leaking an American diplomat's private information, pictures, names of their children, I don't think that that's a formal protest. That is what a thuggish regime would do. That's not how a responsible nation would behave.
Now, this isn't uncommon. U.S. politicians and corporate-owned media often tell the public that their acts of war are motivated by a desire to protect people from evil regimes or brutal dictators. But guess what? The United States provides military assistance to over 70% of dictatorships on Earth. That's by the U.S.'s own qualifications of what constitutes a dictatorship. So if it's not the innate desire to counter dictatorial regimes or a fundamental love for democracy or freedom, what is behind all this anti-China rhetoric? Well, it looks as though, as usual, the politics of this story are inseparable from the economics. Christy AI, the host of Boom Bust, right here on RT, joins me now to break this down. Firstly, Christy, can you explain to us what the context of these remarks are? What this had to do with a leader of some of the Hong Kong protests meeting with a State Department official. Can you explain exactly what went down there?
Absolutely. So what happened was that she called China what a thuggish regime, and I think it's important to point out that the media right now, they're using words like thuggish regimes, and they're demonizing the police forces and glorifying rioters. That is the language that the media has put out. So what we're seeing is a very one-sided report here, and what China is seeing and what China is pointing out is that these are rioters. They don't have any common cause. What they're protesting wasn't even what was actually put on the table. What was put on the table was a simple extradition bill. And currently, the protests have absolutely nothing to do with it. So therefore, China believes that this is the, quote, black hand of Western influence. And so what they're saying is that if you look at the mounting evidence, while it's impossible to actually prove anything, there is a lot of mounting evidence. Hong Kong used to be a listening hub for the CIA back in the day, and being so close to China, it does give the West an access to the East. And so there is that gateway, first of all, to be said. And then second of all, if you look at all the signs that the protesters are carrying, they're all in English. And I mean, if you're in China, you don't really read English. It's not your first language. It's not what's easy for you. So it's actually very telling right now that all of the protest signs are actually in English, a language that is the second. I mean, if you were protesting something, would you write a sign in Spanish?
Right.
It just doesn't make sense. It doesn't add up. And finally, the other thing is, how are these protests funded? How are they getting supplies? Where are they getting all their materials from? This is a very well-funded effort, and this is a very organized group. To just be simply classified as a riot, which leads us to think that this is funded by Westerners.
That's important context. I want to pick apart one thing that you just said. Just like China also alleges that some of these protests are actually funded by the West, do they have a leg to stand on with that claim?
Absolutely. I mean, where else would that money come from? Because you can actually trace a lot of funding parties, and I think you were the one who actually broke the story on that, showing that a lot of the funding parties were in fact just a shell of what the CIA's motives were.
So bring us into the big picture here. Tell us what's going on with the Chinese economy, big picture, as it compares to the U.S. economy. Is the U.S. struggling to maintain its dominance over the global markets?
I think right now it's actually the most exciting part of the world right now, because literally China and U.S. are going tit for tat in the psychological sense in this huge game theory game. It's almost like multi-level chess, because we're waging a war on multiple fronts right now. What started off as a trade war has evolved into a currency war, and to now a technology war,
and
which
maybe
is
even
like
a
the
hot
biggest
war.
thing.
I mean, there's also the news that we may be deploying missiles into Asia. Is that true?
Long-range missiles, yes. So U.S. is now trying to actually put long-range missiles on several islands surrounding Asia in order to exert more influence. They are concerned right now, is what they're saying, that China's influence is growing, spreading down to Australia, to Papua New Guinea, over to Taiwan and Hong Kong, Japan. They're also afraid of right now, China is funding Thailand right now. They're funding a lot of the smaller islands. So if China gains control of these small islands in these key regions, such as Sri Lanka, that is another disputed territory. China currently has a base there. U.S. also wants to put a base there. And the more military bases are around Asia, the more control U.S. has over the West. So it's almost like they want to kind of quash this spread of China influence right now, similar to how they were trying to quash China's influence in the technology landscape by trying to slow down Huawei's.
Right, that's important context. Just to bring it into the even bigger picture, we've got China on the rise. We've got the U.S. economy in decline. From a nation-state perspective, this is a war between China and the U.S. But from a ruling class perspective, is there an even bigger picture at play? Is there a bigger agenda here?
I think one of the biggest telltale signs right now that there is a shift is that you have unobjective parties, traders. Traders do not have loyalty. They put their money where their mouth is. They believe in the direction of the market. And right now, what they're saying is that they believe in China. You have Ray Dalio, the founder of Bridgewater Capital, the largest hedge fund in the world, literally saying it is risky to not invest in China. He says that China, there's an important change coming on in the environment right now, that China will control the future of the supply chain and the future of new technologies, and it's risky to not be involved. And so he, as well as a lot of the other Wall Street hedge funders, they have actually had tremendous outflows out of the U.S. equities market into the Chinese market.
I think that's really important context, and it shows that even though the average U.S. citizen might be suffering as a result of this trade war, the people at the top are probably going to be just fine.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.